including whether they are brass or whether they're the man or woman on the street. That's how they do their job.
Let me yield to Mr. Bishop.
I wonder if I might have a suggestion that would solve this problem for the points that were just made by Mr. Johnson and the amendment sponsor. How about the word impartially?
There you go.
In other words, the problem that we have is that, as you said, you made reference, Ms. Jackson-Lee, this issue, the sort of rhetoric of today of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the use of the term equity implying that there should be different applications of law. I think the definition Mr. Johnson suggested and you embraced would be perfect. So if it should read not effectively and equitably, but ensure that law enforcement entities effectively and impartially serve their communities, I would be able to support your amendment.
Welcome. You're about to watch Republicans and Democrats actually work something out in real time. And it happened because one Republican had the guts to ask a straight question and demand a straight answer. While the left tried to sneak the word equitably into law enforcement language, DEI through the back door, plain and simple, Republicans caught it, called it out, and forced a better outcome. This is exactly what conservative oversight looks like when it's done right. If you want to see how Republicans fight for equal justice under the law instead of activist buzzwords, hit that like button, subscribe right now, and stay to the end because we are breaking the whole thing down.
I actually wanted to ask Ms. Jackson-Lee a question, but I know she's going to greet her friend, and that's okay. Without a microphone, we can always hear your voice. It's fine. I do have great respect for Ms. Jackson-Lee. She is my friend, and I believe you're bringing this amendment in good faith, and I appreciate that. But I do have a genuine question. It seems to me that the amendment is somehow implying that if there's a rise in crime in rural areas, that would not be considered by the subcommittee. And I want to tell you, also in good faith, that is not the intention of this language. The reason that, again, these are illustrative examples of what these subcommittees would be looking into. They're not exhaustive lists. And the reason it says examine the causes of rising crime in urban areas is not to suggest that rising crime in the rural areas would not be important or considered, but just acknowledging the fact that it is widely recognized, and national polling acknowledges, I won't cite them because every poll says the same thing, people are greatly concerned about what's happening primarily in the urban areas and in the cities. And I shared some of the statistics earlier, and I won't belabor the point or take time for it, but just one headline, 9 cities reached record homicide rates in 2022. And it also corresponds to the staffing shortages that are plaguing police departments. And so that seems to be worthy of merit of the subcommittee to look into. But the question I had is, I think I'm fine with that actually, but later you say you add the word equitably, and I'm wondering, and I mean, I'm not trying to, I really want to know, what is that term, how would you define that term? What does that mean exactly?
I'm glad you asked the question because I'm sure you're trying to maybe infer, and I certainly will have another amendment dealing with DEI, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this is not the case. Obviously, as a ranking member of the crime, former chairwoman of the crime committee, I want to make sure that every neighborhood sees a law enforcement officer. I mean, there are neighborhoods that are less financially secure who want to be protected. And as officers go throughout all neighborhoods, they have the skills to be able to respond equitably. Suppose they come on a mental health crisis. And I've always said that they do more than they should be doing. We should have support systems. But let's make sure the mental health crisis is treated the same way, obviously, with the protection of officers as it would be in a higher income area. So just equity, just let them be everywhere, but let it be done equitably. And let me just say this, you're right, it doesn't preclude, but then what is the downside of using in the title rising in urban areas and rural? And just to cite a dear friend, Speaker McCarthy, who wanted to emphasize the increase in crime in some of these areas, but let me be very fair. His city will go unnamed, but the murder rate there in 2021 was 11.91 per 100,000. It was double the murder rate in New York City, 5.55, and San Francisco, 5.6.
Okay, I'm running out of time, but I appreciate that.
All right.
I'm really more concerned, I'm less concerned about adding the rural areas. I'm more concerned about the equitably, because I just feel like, I think a technical dictionary definition of equitably is fair and impartial. So justice would be meted out in a fair and impartial manner. We all agree on that, of course.
Excellent.
But the problem is the subcommittee will examine strategies used by state and local governments to ensure that law enforcement entities effectively and equitably. I don't see any law enforcement disagreeing with that because that's the way they do their job. Okay.
Good officers do their job that way,
Sure.
including whether they are brass or whether they're the man or woman on the street. That's how they do their job.
Let me yield to Mr. Bishop.
I wonder if I might have a suggestion that would solve this problem for the points that were just made by Mr. Johnson and the amendment sponsor. How about the word impartially?
There you
In
go.
other words, the problem that we have is that, as you said, you made reference, Ms. Jackson-Lee, this issue, the sort of rhetoric of today of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the use of the term equity implying that there should be different applications of law. I think the definition Mr. Johnson suggested and you embraced would be perfect. So if it should read not effectively and equitably, but ensure that law enforcement entities effectively and impartially serve their communities, I would be able to support your amendment.
I agree with that entirely, and I think that's a good faith suggestion.
Well, since there are Texans in the room, I've always come to understand that impartial is fair and just. And so Mr. Bishop comes to a point of bringing a Texan and a Louisianan together. We're already neighbors. And I will accept the gentleman's friendly amendment of impartial as it equates to fair and just.
See, we can all get along.
We can all get along. I'd like my amendment to be accepted with the simple.
The gentleman's time has expired. I just want to make sure I understand. The subcommittee will examine strategies used by state and local governments to ensure that law enforcement entities effectively and fairly and impartially serve their commitments that. No fair?
No,
I thought that's what equitably meant when Mr. Johnson defined it. He said fair and impartial.
You don't have to say it. It's effectively and impartially, sir, Chairman. And I just put the legislative history on the record.
Communities in that local process effectively and impartially enforce the law. Okay, we got two impartially. Substitute for the word equitably is the
So it's effectively and impartially. Yes, sir.
All right, without objection, the amendment is amended. The question stands on the gentlelady's amendment.
Here is what just happened and why it matters enormously. Democrats tried to embed the word equitably into the language governing how law enforcement serves communities. That is not an accident. That is DI ideology being smuggled into legislation one word at a time. Equitably does not mean equally. It does not mean fairly. In the woke playbook, equity means different rules for different groups, different applications of the law based on race, income, or identity. That is the opposite of justice, and Republicans were not going to let it slide. Mr. Johnson caught it immediately. He pressed on it directly and refused to accept a vague non-answer. And Mr. Bishop delivered the kill shot. Replace equitably with impartially. One word: precise, legally sound, ideologically clean. That is what principled conservative legislating looks like. No grandstanding, no theatrics, just holding the line on equal justice for every American in every neighborhood regardless of zip code or skin color. And notice what the Democrats did when cornered. They caved because they had no argument. When you strip away the activist language and demand plain English, the left has nothing. Republicans stood for the simple, powerful idea that the law applies the same way to everyone, everywhere, every time. That is not controversial. That is America. And it took Republicans in that room to make sure those words actually made it into the record.